In order to comply with Section 2.2, 3712D of the Code of Virginia, it is necessary for the Board to certify that since the Fairfax County School Board convened a closed meeting on December 2nd, 2019, to the best of each member's knowledge, only public business matters lawfully exempted from open meeting requirements and only such public business matters as were identified in the motion convening the closed meeting were heard, discussed, or considered by the Board during the closed meeting. Do I have a motion? Motion made by Ms. Strauss, seconded by Ms. Evans. All those in favor? I have Ms. Keys-Gamarra, Ms. Strauss, Ms. Evans, Ms. McLaughlin, Mr. Moon, Ms. Palchik, and Ms. Corbett-Sanders. And that is unanimous with Mr. McElveen out of the room. So now, and once again, I apologize to everybody for our delay. We had some important issues to handle. I turn the meeting over to Ms. Megan McLaughlin, our budget chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As the board members are aware, the last Thursday's business meeting, we did receive a presentation from CFO Lee Burden on the mid-year budget review. So, Ms. Burden, if you just want to do a high-level highlight for members of the public who may be watching this particular work session, that they have some context to what we're going to be discussing. This was originally slated for an hour and a half, but because it's a more streamlined budget, mid-year budget than we've had in the past, I anticipate we might be able to catch up about 30 minutes. So, Ms. Burden, I turn it over to you.
Yes, Ms. McLaughlin. The mid-year review is revisions to the fiscal 20 budget based on more current information that we have and also items that have become known since the year-end budget review. The school operating fund only has a couple of changes, recognition of some additional sales tax revenue offset by some increases in utility costs. The other primary changes are a slight change for IDEA, which supports the school operating fund, and those are the revenue changes. On the expenditure side, also just a couple of changes. The middle school cameras at 8 middle schools, it's about $700,000, and then the school board support, which is a transfer from the flexibility reserve, and then the other funds are primarily just year-end changes that we found out after the year-end review was completed on July 25th. Some grant increases for the awards came in on August 16th, and that's pretty much it as far as the mid-year review. This one is far less happening than in previous years.
Great, thank you. And before I turn to board members to begin the discussion, Dr. Brabrand, was there anything you wanted to add?
Well, I guess in the context of the community and the public, we really only have one major request from administration today, and that's to use all of the mid-year adjustment for middle school cameras. This has been the priority of our middle school principals. I asked each of our associations for their top budget priority this year. Middle school principals responded clearly that middle school cameras was the issue, and this is the beginning of what I hope will be really a multi-year plan to completely provide support for cameras in the middle schools. As we have been able to really provide that at our high school level, we want to be able to do it at our middle school level, and I do believe we have Sean DeRose, our president of the Middle School Principals Association, here with us in the audience, if board members want to talk to him to understand a little bit more behind that. Reminder that cameras was one of the recommendations after the Park Lawn incident when we did our full comprehensive security review by Tom Vaccarello. Obviously, that full proposal was more dollars than what we're presenting with you today. This is targeted. This is one-time money to put those cameras in, and I hope the board will engage today and ultimately approve this request.
Thank you, Dr. Brabrand. So board members, right now I have Ms. Palchik has indicated she would like to speak, and then I have Ms. Corbett-Sanders, Ms. Strauss, and Ms. Keys-Gamarra. Okay. All right. So before I go to Ms. Palchuk, the other item that had received quite a bit of school board input at the business meeting had to do with a budget set aside of $625,000 for additional school board staffing support. And so for board members who are here for the conversation, I do want to just provide a very high-level context here. That's just simply a line item that we're going to put money as a set aside for the new board to then have the conversation about how each of the 12 elected officials will need to have or would like to get the support they need for serving their constituencies. As was noted at the business meeting, the Board of Supervisors are each allocated $500,000 per magisterial district, and they, as elected officials, make their own independent decision about how to utilize that staff funding. So this proposal here somewhat reflects that mindset, but obviously at a much smaller scale, where it would be $100,000, again, just as a line item earmark. It's a placeholder. It does not mean that $625,000 is going to be spent, but it is an opportunity to begin the public conversation around this when we look at the demands on school board members in comparison to also our board of supervisors and serving the public. So, Mr. Moon, as my absolutely invaluable vice chair, is there anything else you want to set up contextually before we begin the board member conversation?
I think I've stated at least a couple of occasions, in addition to the last work session, that having served on the board for more than 20 years, Janie obviously 26 years, that the role of the school board members has changed quite a lot. Demands and expectations from the community have also changed. Likewise, I fondly remember olden days where we could wait a couple of weeks to write back to a constituent on a letter sent to us. And it was quite all right for a constituent to wait 2-3 weeks to get a response from board members. And nowadays, if it's not done within 24 hours, they will let us know that they are waiting for a response from us. And at the fingertip, they can send an email to all 12 of us, plus superintendent and other staff, expecting 13 different responses right away. As an at-large board member, especially for at-large, but district as well, on a given day, we have at least several events go on. And as much as possible, I would like to be there. I'd want to be there in every single event, but I cannot. I would love to have somebody who thinks like me, and whose schedule is much more flexible than those who may have to just work from 9 to 5, to be able to go to these events in the evening and weekends, and even represent me, speak on my behalf, because I cannot do all of those myself. That is why that I have, working with you, Mrs. McLaughlin, I feel strong that we need to, for the incoming board, need to set aside a reasonable amount of funding for the next board to be able to get additional help. That's on top of the support they're already getting from the school board, but existing staff in the school board office, their work hours, roles they perform are pretty constrained and limited. So I'm looking for somebody, who can be as flexible as any school board member, and be able to, share more time in talking about policy developments and how to reach out to different communities and et cetera. And that $50,000, will go a long way for us to be able to accomplish that for the next board.
Thank you very much, Mr. Moon. Ms. Palchuk, we will begin with you.
Thank you. Just a few brief comments and questions. So first of all, just to respond to what Ms. McLaughlin and Mr. Moon have said, I do support the set aside for the next board to be able to work with the superintendent and with the clerk's office as well to come up with a plan. I think the way I had mentioned it a while ago, it's looking a little bit the way currently the General Assembly members are doing it, where they are able to hire, 1 to 1.5 staff members, and they do have during session a shared administrative assistant who helps with scheduling. So just want to make sure, there wouldn't be duplicated roles, but that, that there is unity and working on that. And as a incoming supervisor, happy to support that and how our staff work together as well. And then I had a couple questions. Number one, related to this one, as I mentioned at our meeting on Thursday night, I do support this initial investment in security cameras. I also want to make sure that there's a fuller security update coming back to the board again. As I mentioned, I know there's been question and concern about what we've been doing and where areas such as vestibules and additional support for elementary schools is being considered. And then another thing I meant to ask earlier, and I don't know if Ms. Evans, if we've brought this up again, but I had a follow-on motion to our budgets and haven't received an update yet on additional support for our language services programs, because I know that's an area where we've heard a lot of concern, a lot of need, a lot being put on parent liaisons, especially for IEP meetings, many appointments being canceled. So I don't know if we have an update on the review of our language services. I think those are all my questions for now. Thank you.
Yes, my understanding is the follow-on for additional support for language services, that response has been completed. But very recently, so it's just not gotten to you all yet. Dr. Johnson has completed that, and so it just hasn't come to the school board yet. As far as the...
So, Ms. Burden, on that one, why don't we just say we'll agree, we'll get it out. We'll work with Ms. Johnson, get it out this week for the board.
And as far as the update of the safety and security plan, Mr. Vaccarello is here, or maybe Marty can.
And we can certainly work with the board chair and figure out when we can get something on the schedule to bring back an update for the safety and security plan.
Thank you.
Actually, Ms. Palchik, I don't know that I heard your question being answered about the vestibules concerns related to elementary schools. I know I received an email as well from Freedom Hill Elementary community. So if Mr. Vaccarello or somebody can speak to that, I think it's important, given Ms. Palchik raised it, and I think the community is going to have an expectation that we're going to speak about that.
Hello. So the answer is being drafted and provided in the next steps for the vestibule question. We've lined up how many are out there, what the costs are, and that'll be provided unless there's a specific question related to that.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and since you're here at the table, so I haven't heard from other elementary schools, but I did hear from the Freedom Hill Elementary School concern on the vestibules. So for other board members who didn't receive that communication, Mr. Vaccarello, if you could at least maybe lay out what is it that our community is telling us about the vestibules, and what therefore the hope is the board will be doing from a governance standpoint.
So with the renovation process, the vestibules are going in, all schools. Freedom Hill in particular has a parent or community group that has suggested funding the vestibule on their own. So a response was given back to them based upon the equity lens of what does that look like if a school can come up with the money or not, and how does that work. So that's the simple and short answer to it. But we were asked to lay this out in a spreadsheet as to what the costs are, how many schools have been done, how many are left, what the recommendation is going forward. As I sit in front of you, of course, the vestibule is a great security feature, like a lot of security features are, but it becomes a funding piece, and they're being done now with renovations.
So I appreciate that. I guess my initial question, and I don't know if any of this needs to be closed or not, which is why I wasn't asking more specific security questions, would be, it sounds like you're giving us an update of where we are, how many schools, and I know it's difficult to decide, based on the renovation cycle, how many are being renovated in the next 3 to 5 years, and then with an equity lens, because I too have heard from Freedom Hill, and like I said at our board meeting, want to be cautious that we are definitely having an equity lens, and we are not, having one-offs where schools are able to fund their vestibules versus schools that are not. But then I guess my bigger question is for the next board, definitely for this to be included in, which is why I asked for an update of, the recommendation, where we are in security, and what are the next recommendations, and should this be included in that budgetary?
Right, and as Marty said, we can schedule time, and I think one of the things, Tom, we can talk about, work with staff, Marty, is to what degree can we use operating dollars, or to what degree can we use savings in our renovations to fund additional non-renovated schools that may still have vestibule needs? Can we use some of the additional $25 million we've gotten from our work with the Board of Supervisors, or savings from a renovation that comes in a little bit? I know sometimes renovations go above cost, but if they come in below, can we reallocate some of those dollars? And I think we can have the answers to those questions when we have the work session after showing you the scope of the cost.
No, and I appreciate it. And I guess the question, the reason I'm bringing up for the revenue, the budget, mid-year budget review, thank you, is this also, is it recommended that we incorporate this in budget review, since this can be done as a one-time funding formula? Thank you.
And so I would, as we're pulling together the report in terms of our assessment and getting those costs to the board, we could certainly look at that and utilizing one-time costs to do that. I know when I was a principal at Franklin Sherman, as we were doing renovations at that time, I planned the renovation, and it was around 2005 when we were planning that, and that was the first wave of schools that were getting these built-in vestibules to slow folks down and drive traffic into the front office. We know with some of our schools, the front offices aren't located near the front doors, so as part of the assessment, it's trying to figure out how we address those schools where the front office isn't in a place where we could add a vestibule to the school, and then looking at that through an equity lens as well. So there are a lot of factors to think about. Perhaps at the Freedom Hill community, and I know I haven't been there for a couple of years, but to look at the layout of our buildings, think about where and how we can provide those vestibules, and certainly what those costs would be. We're going to provide that to the board.
Great. Okay, next on the list, I have Ms. Corbett Sanders, followed by Ms. Strauss, and then Ms. Keys-Gamarra.
Great, thank you so much, and I'm glad to follow Ms. Palchik regarding the security issue. Two things. One, it would be helpful as a next step to have a timeline for how many additional middle schools need cameras, and what's the plan for getting cameras to them. And along the same lines, I know this afternoon we are going to begin the conversation about the capital improvement plan. In this case, it's about new development. But I would offer as a next step that we build into our CIP a section on security enhancements and a timeline for achieving those security enhancements, because that really becomes our working document for addressing our capital plan needs. And then last, I do want to talk about the staffing for school board offices. I will share with my colleagues, I had a conversation over the weekend with a community member who was talking about the need for constituent services by school board members, and that she said, you know, sometimes it takes a bit longer than I expected. And I said, well, you realize that our school board members are limited in staff support. And they were stunned. They said, what do you mean? And I said, well, we have we share an EA, and then everything else is really on the school board member in trying to best serve the needs of their community members and get responses in working with the superintendent's staff. And the person said, well, I spent 30 years on Capitol Hill, and there is no way that I would have ever expected that the level of professionalism that comes out of your board is dependent on sole practitioners. And I am so impressed, but it really is not fair to expect each individual board member to be a sole practitioner at that level of effort that they need to put in to best serve the needs of their community. And I thought she captured it perfectly, which is, you know, there is a level of expectation by our community for us to be able to serve the needs of our community members. And the concept that we are doing this with part-time administrative staff is just stunning for most people who watch what we're doing. And so I will fully support the recommendation for funding for the first 6 months before we get to the new budget, staffing for the new board, so that we can be most effective day one.
Thank you, Ms. Corbett-Sanders. Ms. Strauss?
Great, thank you. One of the things I do want to hear from Mr. DeRose, thank you for being here. Hopefully all your children are just fine today. Because it was at our board meeting last week, there were a lot of concerns. And I do support the cameras for the middle schools, but I think we need on the record Mr. DeRose's comments in why our middle schools would like them. And as he is collecting his thoughts, I just want to provide a little bit of clarity on the school board flexibility reserve. On the one hand, I do support setting money aside. We live in different times, different place, expectations, et cetera. And as we have had to cut budgets over the years, the school board office has been cut as well. So, I mean, we have, and a lot of that has never come back in. But just so that, because I'm the last person who remembers this stuff, the school system does not have reserves. The Board of Supervisors do, by the way, if you take a look at how their entire budget is crafted, and they have to have reserves. I mean, the only sort of reserve that we have is the retirement piece, which was after the Enron situation. So, and when we go through a recession, and I've been through 3 recessions on the board, we have to serve every child. There's, you know, and if you remember at the beginning of our last recession in 2008, all of a sudden we had a dramatic change in student enrollment to the tune of 8,000 kids who normally would be on every year basis. You take a certain amount of kids in, they move out to, you know, whatever, and all of a sudden it stopped, which is a challenge, but we still have to staff. The flexibility reserve actually came in a year in which the board, in its wisdom, had decided to give salary increases, and they were justified for the entire staff. And we changed the formulas for retirement, for all the rest of that. And all of a sudden, we saw a dramatic change in the number of people retiring, because at that time it was the average salary of your last 3 years. So the year's salary lapse changed, and we began carrying an $18 million projected deficit in October. And the school board at that time there was a pressure to continue to spend money. And this was when Dr. Splain was here. And he finally said, you have to stop. He said, you are criminally liable for a deficit budget. You can't do this. So at the time, there was no no opportunity for the schools to close that reserve easily. And in the way the school system finally had to do it, they began taking money back from appropriated funds already allocated to schools at mid-year. It was extremely painful. The budget was slowed down. That deficit was closed, but it was painful. And so the next year, we established that reserve. Good governance would require the school system to set aside a certain percentage of its budget as a reserve, but the Board of Supervisors have always argued that the county reserves are there for the school system, but we have never been in a situation where those reserves were tapped to help the school system when times are tough. So you have to be careful what you do with that reserve. So anyway, that's the big picture with that. But at any rate, I think it is important that we hear from Mr. DeRose on the security cameras, because there has been some concern on both sides, so that, and I do support it, but I think your voice and your recommendation on behalf of the middle school principals is very important.
Well, thanks.
Thanks.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. Thanks for having me. I think one of the first and probably the most important thing that I can say, especially Ms. Strauss, what I've learned, I'm leading middle school principals this year, and they are an amazing group of educators with a diverse, leading diverse schools, and each one of these schools has different needs. What was striking was when we came together this fall, we started talking about advocacy and what would have the greatest impact on our school academically, culture, and it was unanimous. And I think this group of people around the table can just understand how rare it is, especially to have such a diverse group of people leading diverse groups of schools, and diverse approaches to leadership. Not consensus, but unanimous across the table on how important it is and how beneficial it would be for internal cameras at the middle school level. There is a wide variety, and I didn't have the opportunity to hear the previous conversations around this topic, so I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. I think for me personally, is what I have learned specifically in schools, and I've especially in any school, is if you are going to improve school achievement, the school culture, it starts really in the classrooms. And everybody being aligned around instruction. And how cameras directly relate to this is there is an inordinate amount of time that we as administrators spent doing things such as investigating instances or hearing some concerns, just a lot of things that pull us out from supporting students and teachers in the classroom. We believe, especially after consulting a lot of our high school principals, that this time, shortening the time amount of investigations and really using that time to get back into the classrooms, providing meaningful feedback for our students, following up with students, it's really been a game changer and will be a game changer for us. Especially, as you all know, from a middle school level standpoint, especially around the topic of safety and security, the amount of staffing that goes into it isn't nearly as much as the high school level. But I just want to keep coming back. I love my colleagues at the middle school level, and I just want to say that them coming to a unanimous vote, which was really eye-opening for me, around the importance of interior cameras and having the biggest impact in our school, led us to me sitting here today.
Thank you. Ms. Strauss, anything else?
No, it's just important that we heard from you. So thank you very much for being here.
Okay. So I would stay here just in case other board members would like to draw upon your remarks. So I now have Ms. Keys-Gamarra followed by Ms. Evans.
Thank you. I will start with actually the audit report. Dr. Brabrand, we received a report in the last few months that there was a concern about the bleachers and how there had to be some repair, but there was also a concern about going forward the maintenance for those to avoid those types of emergency situations. So I just wanted to ask the question, whether this mid-year, and it may be included in a non-descriptive language here, which is why I want to pose the question as to whether there's any kind of proposal to address that in this mid-year budget.
I don't know, I'll have to ask Mr. Smith.
No, there are no dollars set aside in this mid-year proposal for addressing issues around bleachers. I know that those issues did arise at the audit committee meeting.
Are we in a position, Mr. Smith, to share with the board yet what our approach will be if we're not using mid-year dollars to address the bleachers?
I would have to ask Mr. Plattenberg. I know that he stepped out on the phone, but we are working with the team to pull together. I know that Mr. Moss was at the meeting that evening and shared some of the issues and concerns moving forward. I know that we are utilizing current funds to ensure that we have those bleacher, the modifications up to par, and that we're doing the testing that needs to be done. But moving forward, there will be a need for funding to ensure that we're in compliance with that.
So perhaps we can put that as a next step so that we know what the plan is going forward. I also wanted to speak on, with respect to middle school cameras, I did want to ask the question more specifically, why? And I guess I got a general answer to that. But I'm wondering, I think I heard, and I'm not clear, Dr. Brand, as to whether there are some middle schools with cameras or not. And if so, can you clarify that?
Right. I know Marty or Mr. Vaccarella can correct me on the specifics. Some middle schools already have cameras as a result of renovation that's been complete. And when the renovation was done, cameras were added as part of the renovation. A few middle schools, I don't remember how many, Mr. Vaccarella, have received state grants, security grants, to be able to put in cameras. As a reminder for the public, as Ms. McLaughlin said, the middle schools still do the same community engagement required by this board in 2016 or 17 that asked for community engagement process before cameras are placed in schools. All of our community engagement processes thus far for middle schools have been favorable. Our community is asking us each and every day how we can make sure our schools are safer. I know Mr. DeRose mentioned the inside cameras. Of this money here, there are a few schools that had outside cameras, and inside cameras would be added. There are some schools that have neither outside nor inside cameras, and a number of schools will get both outside and inside cameras in this money that's being dedicated. It's also my intent to use one-time money over the next, frankly, several quarters to complete the middle schools so that they have the same 100% coverage and footprint as our high schools do. Workload is the big issue in this system. Student workload, teacher workload, and administrator workload. And my taking from the Middle School Principals Association meeting this fall is the quickest way to cut the workload and be the instructional leaders you're asking us to be, Dr. Brabrand, is to have those cameras on the outside, if we've never had them, to extend our security perimeter, but on the inside to make sure that the numerous times that we're asked to investigate, check, or see something in the hallway or cafeteria that middle school kids can engage in, and middle school kids can engage in a lot of activities, that we can use that to help nip in the bud and get clarity on what did and did not happen. And the amount of time that can be saved to then redirect administrators back into doing their instructional duties is time well spent.
All right, I think that answers my question with respect to that. My last comment will have to do with the school board reserve. And I know that the counter argument has been that this board has not used the support that we have well. And I think one of the things that might be helpful to me is what support should a board member expect, right? We have 8 new people coming in with an EAA available to them. What does that mean? And I think that's particularly important when I've heard this comment about not using what we have well. Trust me, if I know something's available, I will use it. So I think we need to have some clarification on what's available.
You know, what's amazing, if I could, I'm sorry, Ms. McLaughlin. I was a high school principal. 2,000 kids. Let's call each kid with 2 parents, just for rough numbers. 4,000 parents, 6,000. My community was 6,000. I had an EAA 100% dedicated to me. You, as an at-large member, have responsibility for 190,000 kids, times 2, let's call it, I'm going to go rough because my math is sloppy, 400,000 parents for a total of 600,000 potential constituents, and you're sharing an EAA. To me, this is part of the whole just framing for the community. What are the community expectations? And the equity in some cases between the supports that I have to do my job and principals have to do theirs, and you all as school board members to do yours. And so to me, as I've listened to you all over the last several years, when we talk about workload, our school board members, in my view, many times feel overwhelmed with the demands of the job. Is it reasonable to have additional supports? I think it is, and it's going to be a very, I think, helpful opportunity to get this new board off to the right start that it needs and deserves.
If I could make just one last comment, and I guess I direct this to Madam Chair, I think certainly for me, but more so for the new people coming in, outlining what those expectations should be with respect to an EAA would be very helpful going forward, and I think perhaps avoid any miscommunications or inappropriate expectations. So I would just ask that as a next step to in the spirit of clarity going forward.
Thank you, Ms.
We'll make sure that gets taken care of.
Before I go to Ms. Evans, Ms. Keys-Gamarra, I will just tack on real quickly to what you said about the EAA roles and responsibilities. We do have currently within the school system a job description, and that is how those employees applied for the jobs, accepted the jobs, and that is the expectations for the jobs. I do think with the new board, what will be very helpful is to review that job description, and as a new board of 12, to have the conversation of how will that intersect necessarily with the additional supports that the board members are talking about. So you're bringing up very important information that we need to be thinking about in terms of however this goes in the mid-year budget review for additional staffing. We'll certainly want to do the best integration possible so that there isn't, as Ms. Palchuk, I think you also said, not wanting to overlap responsibilities.
So, Ms. McLaughlin, I will put this on our agenda for chairs, and we will come back to the existing board as well as the new board as to what they can expect in that area.
Okay, Ms. Evans, thank you for your patience, and I have Mr. McElveen, you're up next.
Thank you very much. I have a couple of pending budget questions that potentially relate to the mid-year review. One is about parent liaison hours. My concern is I've been hearing that when we added benefits for our parent liaisons, that parent liaison hours had gotten cut back, and I'm trying to determine if that's true. And so I had asked the question to compare last year's parent liaison hours with this year's parent liaison hours, so I would like to know what the answer to that is, because if we need to add more money in here to prevent parent liaison hours from being cut back, then I would be interested in doing that. On a second question is about AARTs. Last year, we put AARTs in all of our Title I elementary schools. We didn't put it in our one Title I middle school, and I would be interested in pursuing that. I did ask a question about how much that would cost to do that. And two questions and two next steps that I wanted to pursue. One is Mr. DeRose, thank you for being here. This will ultimately go to you and some of your colleagues. We were very pleased to add money into the end of year budget review to add extracurriculars at some of our middle schools. And I know you've given me a preliminary report on how the funds were used, but as a next step, I would be interested in getting specifics on exactly how they were used, what activities were added, if people did add a fourth day, student participation. I think that would be useful for us to know in the future, because I certainly hope that we can continue to provide those extra funds. If you want to address that before, when my time's up, but if you hold off for 1 minute. And then on the cameras, thank you for your advocacy on the security cameras. I will say when we first discussed this several years ago, I was skeptical of putting cameras inside our high schools. I was among those that had several concerns. It's a different day now, and so I do support putting these cameras in. But I also think that as a next step, it will be important for us to hear from the principals what impact they believe these have had, and to the extent that they can tell us, how has this changed the middle school environment. I think that will be important. So those are I have two questions for Ms. Burden, and then I think be happy to hear from Mr. DeRose about those two issues too. The question about the parent liaison hours and the AART.
I recently reviewed the response to that, so I'm surprised that it's not gotten to you all yet. So we'll need to check on that and find out where that response is.
Well, aside from the response, so what overall have parent liaison hours been cut back?
I do not believe so. The budget question, to my recollection, basically asked us to provide the number of hours for the parent liaisons,
Correct.
Which it does, but I don't recall there being a comparison, but I don't have any knowledge of them being reduced.
Okay.
What we could do, Ms. Evans, on that is simply, if we've already run the number of hours, we can do a quick cross-check if it didn't come out in the question and just compare it and let you know that as a follow-up.
Well,
That's what you're trying to do, is the delta between the number of hours so far this year and whether that's less than year-to-date the year before.
Right.
Dr. Braburn, we did include a 5-year history, and it is not reduced in this year.
Okay. Well, if it's prepared, could you just send that to us now?
Well, it leaves me, and it goes to Mr. Smith, and then it goes to Dr. Brabrand, I think. So let me find where it is.
Okay.
It could even be posted at this point, perhaps, because I just reviewed it last week. So let me see where it is.
Here's what we'll do, Ms. Evans. We'll take a break. When we have our CIP meeting with the county, we can huddle, and we can do we're all in the room, we can do the approval and get it out to the board this afternoon.
That sounds great. And then the AART, I mean, it's one position. And again, well, while you're looking for that, I guess I will ask if
That's another question that's, appears to have made it through the approval processes, and the cost is $99,000. But
Okay.
again, we can check on that when we have a break.
Okay, sounds good. And Mr. DeJoris, did you have comments to make on either of those other 2 points? I'd be interested in your.
Sure, where do you want to start?
Why don't we start with the extracurriculars? I think that would be good for us to know what impact you've seen so far since.
Yeah, I mean, I think one thing first of all, thank you for the funds. I think our ultimate goal as principals is, we want to keep our students as long as we can in our building because we know that's a place where they are safe. And speaking in a school that is, over 1,900 students, from the minute they get off the bus at 7 o'clock to keeping them to almost 5 o'clock at night, we wish we could do that for almost all 1,900 of them. And what we are seeing too is with those additional funds, we're trying to play a little bit of a balance of both, to be honest with you. Right now, where we have lacked in the past of additional funds to pay teachers, staff members to sponsor after-school clubs because of the certain budget. We had to stay within budget. Now that a budget has gone a little bit better, we're able to expand our course offerings to really offer robust options that encourage more and more students to stay after. Also being new at this too, I know some schools have automatically added an extra day. We haven't yet. We've just expanded our offerings, and we're seeing the benefits of that. I know that we're also having discussions, especially when we get back from winter break, as we get closer towards the end of the year and SOLs, of using that budget money, looking at our budget, and then determining whether we can offer a fourth day, especially when it comes time for extra academic prep at the end of the year. Yeah.
Great. Mr. McElveen?
Thank you. And thank you to Lee and Alice for being here and for putting up with our delays over the many years that you've been here. This is our last work session with you, and it's been a pleasure. And thank you to Sean for being here as well. We're very glad to hear your perspective, and I'll certainly be supporting the cameras for middle schools. On the other part of our conversation, I find this to be a very difficult conversation because at the base of it, it implies that we as board members are not doing our jobs well. And I'm looking around this table, and particularly those at this table today, I believe all of us give 110%. I believe all of us do our job well. I know, having been on email chains with many of my colleagues, I know that they respond rapidly, and they are very attentive to the needs of their constituents. And to imply that we need more people to do our jobs effectively is offensive to me. Others, I know, don't feel that way. There was a time when our school board office, and certainly Ms. Strauss was here for this, when we had no additional support beyond the clerk staff. We did not have EAAs, and I know when past board members have come to us and seen how well-staffed we are, they're frankly shocked. I know Kate Hanley, for one, has walked to our office and remarked that. And this board, certainly over the past 8 years, has had many conversations about school board staffing, many work sessions devoted to the subject. And I think I recall 2 issues being brought to light as needing attention. Number one, and certainly Ms. Evans, Ms. McLaughlin, and others have been an ardent advocate for this, was an ombudsman. And the question was where we would put that ombudsman. Should it be in the school board office? Well, to his credit, Mr. Superintendent Brabrand, without necessarily drawing on the board's conversations, went ahead and implemented that position, I think, to great acclaim in the community. The second piece was communications. There were concerns that board members needed help drafting and writing and communicating to the public that they serve. And certainly I think part of our current EAA job description is that you have to have great communicators, and I believe that we do. I'm right in front of one right now. I know Melanie, for one, was my former EAA, and she was a Hill staffer. She did communications for a congressman. And so we certainly have folks trained in that. In addition, Dr. Brabrand went extra staff to staff the board with a liaison in the communications department that we work with on newsletters and other folks. So those were the 2 major areas, ombudsman, communications, that I heard the greatest need. The one unique thing that I've heard is from Mr. Moon about having someone to attend events for us. And that may very well be a need. I will say, when I see Jerry Connolly staffers or other folks at events, you know, it's not nearly as impressive as having the elected officials there. No offense intended to them. So there's that. So I do have a couple questions on this, and I'll keep it short because my time, I think, is up. If you want me, I can come back. That's okay. Okay, thank you. So I think bureaucratically, I would ask those who have proposed this, I really don't know who answers this question, but who oversees who would oversee these staff? Sir, I don't think it would be school board office. I don't think it's superintendent. Does each board member get a pot of money? They conduct the HR evaluations, annual evaluations, and those kind of things. What are you envisioning for that? And then I'll just ask my second question to save time. My question would be to Dr. Braybrand and his staff, because in my opinion, and others certainly can disagree with this, I think this is going to add an undue and extreme burden on I would say particular budget staff, but certainly other staff, having 2 people to answer to instead of 1, potentially. I think it would double, certainly on my account, if I had someone out there throwing questions at, it would probably triple the amount of questions you'd have to answer. I can't envision a superintendent or a leadership team wanting to work in that environment where you're having to answer to that many people in addition to those in the system. So that would be my question for Dr. Braybrand.
Mr. McAfee, I'm actually going to, as the meeting manager for this section, I'm going to speak first, and I'm going to ask Mr. Moon as my vice chair of the budget, because he and I have engaged with the leadership team on this conversation again about what is a line item. It is not a orchestrated plan that will be for the next board to determine, but you can't have a conversation about potential additional staff for school board if you don't have any budget funds set aside for it. At its simplest level, and I appreciate that you're sharing your very thoughtful observations on this, but let's be clear for everyone who's listening and for the public, the Board of Supervisors, who you and I also elect and pay our taxes to, are given $500,000 a board member to run and serve the constituencies. No one ever says that the Board of Supervisors do not do their jobs, that they delegate their jobs, and that they are incapable of doing their jobs on their own. But they do have staffing for multiple people to help them with constituent services. That this board would consider having 1 staff member who is at will, that we do hire and select to serve our communities as we see best fit. While they do that with multiple board members, they review, they do the HR, they do the hiring, they do the firing. That is within their elected purview. Every elected official in Virginia, from the General Assembly to the local officials at the Board of Supervisors level, they all have funding to hire someone. When the voters vote them in, they trust their judgment for it. To say that the school board is the only elected official in the entire Commonwealth of Virginia that doesn't have the public trust to do that, I think that's actually an insult to our jobs. It's an insult to every one of us who's been elected. And we will have to iron out how this is going to look. But let's be clear, this isn't coming out of a vacuum. It already exists for decades with the Board of Supervisors. We're simply asking for equity. And to the point about Ms. Hanley, if you're referencing, because when she used to serve on the appointed school board, as Ms. Strauss and Mr. Moon have said over the last 20 to 25 years, the electronic age and the growth of this county and the expectations of the families in the 24/7 communications era, no, what Ms. Hanley needed to run the school board office at the time is nothing at what needs to be done now. But I'm proud of the fact that this board has always been fiscally responsible. We've never asked for more than has been provided to any other elected official, but it's time that we finally stop hamstringing this one elected body in all of the Commonwealth. Mr. Moon, did you want to add? Since we were in conversations with staff.
Just briefly, as a proponent of this line item to set aside a reasonable amount of funding to support the next board, I'm not implying that 12 school board members have not been doing their job well, but that line item will be there so that the next 12 board members can even do better jobs. Because community demands that, community expects that. As far as potentially being additional workload on the part of superintendent's staff by school board member having another person to perhaps engage with the staff. I first of all, I disagree with the notion that we will be putting more work on their part, but even if that does, if that is being done with intent to run the school system even better, we need to do that. We are obligated. We must do that. But as I envision what the additional staff would be able to assist the elected school board members, they may even be able to take some burden off, workload off from superintendent staff. A lot of times my EAA may be asking for something from staff, asking staff to craft a certain response. So rather than having my EAA ask superintendent staff, and superintendent staff has to set aside the time to actually do that, I could ask this next board, not me, they could ask this additional person who could be policy-oriented person or communication-minded person, could craft responses, and if that person feels that some technical assistance is needed, they can certainly share that with the superintendent to look into to see whether there is anything more to be provided in the response as drafted. So I don't believe that is, first of all, intent is not to create more work on the part of staff. Intent is not to imply that our 12 board members have not been doing their job well. I am part of these 12 board members, but only to help the next board to do better jobs.
Thank you for your thoughtful responses. I'll try and hear from Dr. Braybrand privately, but I would advise my colleagues in LT to be careful what you ask for. Thanks.
Mr. McElveen, again, I appreciate that you have really helped us to continue to have a very robust conversation about an important change. I do want to just also reassure everyone who's listening, the fact that it has worked well for the Board of Supervisors to have multiple staff serving them and not creating an overburden on county staff and the county executive. I think 12 board members having just one, not multiple staffers working alongside of them, I don't foresee why it would be any less capable for our superintendent and their leadership team to handle what the Board of Supervisors, county executive, and his staff already do. Mr. Moon, you've not had a turn yet to talk about the overall, what's proposed in front of us, including the cameras, or if there's anything else, maybe what Ms. Evans was talking about.
There's nothing more to add. I'll be supporting Midyear budget review, and I hope that since we are out of time, that I'm not gonna ask Mr. Marty Smith about the questions I was going to ask, but hopefully you will provide soon the next board with a potential space options for next board members to be able to do their work?
Yes, we're looking at space assessments across the system, and we've identified a few areas, and we would certainly be able to share that with the next board.
Ms. Keys-Kamar, you have a go back?
This is just really quick because I know this board has had a discussion about middle school start times and you're here. And so I don't know if you can provide us any, Dr. Brayman, if you think it's inappropriate, I don't have to ask the question. But I just wanted to know if he had any feedback for the board as we go into that discussion later on.
Well, what I'd say honestly is I didn't prep Mr. DeRose, or not prep, I did not tell Mr. DeRose that he'd be asked to represent the Association of Middle School Start Times. I know that has come to my attention as an interest from some board members. I did say I would reference that in my budget coming up in January in the appropriate way that I think it needs to be. And maybe then at that time to bring in the middle school principals and hear their voice might be the best after I've had a chance to put forward my thinking.
Okay.
to be honest. But, I mean, in the end,
Well, I mean, he doesn't have to speak on behalf of the middle schools.
correct.
I'm just wondering.
if he's comfortable, but he may,
he's not, that's fine.
if he's not, I would just ask the board respectfully if he would prefer to decline, he could.
All I can tell you is, I'll take the kids whenever we can get them. I think there's pros and cons of everything. I'd love to speak with you offline, and you're right, I haven't given it a lot of thought. But I will tell you from my perspective, and I speak for all of our colleagues, whenever they get off that bus, we'll take them, and we'll take them for as long as we can.
All right, before we go to next steps, I do want to take my turn about the middle school cameras. I do appreciate that Mr. Vaccarello, your team did a security analysis after Parkland, and it was the determination that interior cameras in our middle schools would be a valuable addition to safety and security in our schools. It's my understanding, and Ms. Evans, you touched on it very well, which was to say, what has been the benefit to date of our interior cameras, whether in the middle schools who already have them, certainly to our high schools that have them. And I think that's a really important component of this public dialogue. And if we're not prepared to speak to it today, I would say when the board goes to vote on the mid-year budget, which will be a week from Thursday on the 19th, I think that's going to be a critical piece for our community as well as for the board members on the vote. I'm proud after 8 years to serve on a board where every single one of the 12 of us recognizes the incredible amount of expertise and experience that our principals have. But as Dr. Brabrand has said time and again in his tenure here, it is the teamwork that makes our school system strong. And board members are part of the team as we are elected to represent all of our stakeholders and community. And so having board members knowledgeable, having the public knowledgeable about the benefits that we can speak to about what the interior cameras have done helps to not only demonstrate you have an educated board who ultimately votes for these funds, but also I think helps bring the community along on why when we recognize that there are freedoms that are given up when you have interior cameras, but overall the public good wants to ensure safety for all students. But we need to be able to speak with it, I think, with clarity.
So we informally do get some reports back from high school principals now of the benefits. Typically, how many times have you used these and what have you done with it? How has it benefited you? I think we need to do a deeper dive into the metrics on this, into the data that's out there, not just informally, but what maybe in SIS as well.
We'll get this board what we have before the vote next week. And moving forward, as Ms. Evans said, as we add these new 8 schools, if the board does approve this at the mid-year budget adjustment, work on having a way to just make that a periodical update as we have new schools added to monitor the data in those schools.
It's essentially looking at the return on investment. So as we think about how we have some practices in place to look at return on investment within our Office of Research and Strategic Improvement, we could certainly look at some of that data and share with the board what the return on that investment is. And it goes across more than just a fiscal return on investment, but looking at the social and academic return on investment as well.
I appreciate that, but I would say again, for some of the board members who have brought up the public's concerns about privacy for students, and is it keeping our schools safe, or is it just another method for student discipline and student punishment? I think we need to be able to speak to that more thoughtfully and with greater clarity, and that would need to be done by next Thursday. So I for one, just want to echo that I think that's a responsible step for the board. We don't say we'll fund it and then we'll get the metrics. And I mean, you fund something because you know that it's the right way to spend dollars.
We have metrics
Yeah.
we'll put together before next week, what we have. I do think all I was saying there is we'll be more intentional as we add schools to track it. I also think it's important, this equity lens around school discipline, Ms. McLaughlin, is right on the money. I do think, much like the county is about to go countywide with body-worn cameras for our officers, having cameras even inside in our schools provides another layer of accountability to be able to go back and see what's happened or what has not happened, and to make sure that we're not pulling kids into incidences of discipline and having a consequence that doesn't match the actual role that the student had. And sometimes this gets into, particularly at middle and high, and I lived it at high school, he said, she said, people's perceptions of certain kids. And I think the cameras can help bring a clarity that doesn't exist, and we'll speak to that in the report that you get.
I appreciate that, Dr. Brabrand. I think you actually raised something very important, which is about the body-worn cameras that we now have for our police officers. You know, the goal is that that's beneficial to police officers for accountability, but it's also beneficial for the public. And so, you know, the interior cameras, the last thing we want is for innocent students to be falsely accused and identified for something that they, in fact, had not had a discipline action that they should have been punished for.
You know, I can speak to this just really briefly in the sense that Glasgow has external cameras because we have a bus depot. What I will tell you is, Mr. McLaughlin, it's a game changer for us as well. There's nothing worse. I mean, I think is being called in and questioned about something that we had no idea that we were being questioned about. I can tell you, just external cameras, that whenever there is an instance in outside, one of the first things that we say is, you know, can we check the video? Can we see if we can identify the right students who are right there that we can get more information from? As opposed to, let's round up everybody who was anywhere nearby, and they may have came into the scene late. They may have never been there in the first place or been a part of it. So it comes back to that accountability piece. And I think even for an efficiency piece of making sure we get it right the first time, this accountability, which matters not only to me as a parent, but me as a principal as well.
Great, thank you. And then finally, while I did provide some contextual response to Mr. McElveen as the budget chair, where we talked about school board staff, I just want to publicly emphasize that right now the way that the staffing works in the school board office is that school board members do not have independent authority to hire their executive assistant. We don't. We are part of a hiring team, but we do not get to select our own person who serves with us. And when you have 12 elected officials, you have 12 different points of view, 12 different perspectives on how you want to serve in your role and the work that you want to do, the emphasis of where you want that work to be. Is it communications? Is it constituent outreach? Right now, our EAAs are work on contracts that are 8 to 4:30. School board members, a lot of our communication and our constituent interface happens after school hours. So when our EAAs are going on leave, it's run through the school board deputy clerk and the clerk. That doesn't necessarily interface with our own vacation schedules, where our needs are. The evaluations are done by the school board clerk and deputy clerk. There's a lot that people don't understand, that right now, school board members don't have a direct relationship with the hiring and the supervision of their EAAs. And again, we do share them not only with another school board member, but with the other responsibilities within the school board office. So as people say right now, I've got about a third of a time that I can draw upon an EAA who is capped at 40 hours a week. The other elected officials throughout the Commonwealth of Virginia have an at-will employee that they hire, they supervise, and they review. And the hours they work with, again, it's not on those 40-hour contracts. So there's a lot of ability here to put the school board members on at least a level of equity for accountability to our constituents by having this one position. And so I really do hope that next Thursday we will see our colleagues support this. Even if you individually don't feel the need, don't want the need, we need to ensure that every single elected official has the opportunity to determine how best to serve, and the funding is certainly very reasonable. So at this point, we'll be going to next steps. The good news is we are now at 2:34, so we've made up a good amount of time since the next session was supposed to start at 2. Okay, I see Ms. Corbett-Sanders, you have the first two. If you could review and determine if they say what you meant.
So the first is provide a plan for ensuring all middle schools. Obtain cameras. And the plan should include timeline and cost. The second one seems to be fine. Include in the CIP a section on security enhancements and timeline for achieving them.
Great. Ms. Keys-Kamara, I see you have the next one. Okay. Just for, again, the audience who's watching this and can't see this. So the first one says, provide a plan for ensuring all middle schools obtain cameras, and a plan. The plan should include timeline and cost for getting these cameras. Second one is include in the CIP a section on security enhancements and timelines for achieving them. Third one, Ms. Keys-Kamara, is provide information about the plans to repair bleachers as identified in the audit report. The next one, Ms. Evans, you have the next two.
Yeah, that should be getting specifics on middle school after-school funds. Provided at year end. Well, funds provided at year end.
Or used.
Let's see, getting specifics on middle school, after school, funds provided to you. Yes, what activities were added? Yes, how does student participation compare this year than in previous years? That's fine. From provide, yeah, details. Yeah. Right. Okay. Okay. Okay, so this was, we know that there are some I guess this is actually both current middle schools that do have the cameras that get from current middle school principals, well, from middle school principals who have the cameras. I think you can just end it at what impacts the cameras have had. And that's really kind of also a down the road kind of a thing. Assuming that we provide these funds here, I think that down the road we will need to get a report from the middle schools that are getting them. I believe there are 8 that would get it from these funds. And so perhaps at a reasonable time would want to get an answer on that. Absolutely. Thank you.
So I recall that for next steps, and I just want to make sure when we're prepared for the vote a week from Thursday, Ms. Evans, you had asked about the middle school advanced academic resource teacher staffing, and we were told it'd be roughly $99,000.
Right.
So does that need to be noted here as a next step, as in terms of, do you want that as an amendment?
I don't think it needs to be noted here. I have the answer, they've given me the answer now, so I'm just going to have to think about whether I'm going to put an amendment in now or whether this is more appropriate to be in the FY21 budget. So I'm just going to have to ponder that, but thank you for remembering that.
Okay. And also, Ms. Evans, I believe you asked the question about parent liaisons and their funding.
Right, and Dr. Braybrand says he'll get us the answer, that the answer's been prepared, and so.
Right, but as budget chair, I'm trying to determine again, is that something you think you may want to put forward as an amendment for next Thursday?
Possibly, depending on what the answer is, although if there haven't been cutbacks, as I say, I was told by some people that there had been cutbacks. If that's not the case, then that changes, I'll need to see the information to determine whether I'll want to have a budget amendment.
I just
Thank
want to
you.
make sure
Yeah.
Mr. Moon and I, as chair and vice chair of the budget, be prepared if anything's going to be
Right.
coming our way.
So those would be the only two potential budget amendments I might have at this point, and again, it depends on other information coming
Okay.
in.
Ms. McLaughlin, I just
Yes.
thank you for bringing that up, because I know the language services information is coming, and I don't know if we need to note it or not, but just want to make sure we, and you especially, are aware of that. And want to clarify from, I guess, number 200, Ms. Corbett-Sanders, does that include, review recommendations on future safety improvements and possible funding sources? Okay, thank you. Including vestibules?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. And then I know there is, my next step isn't listed there, but I had mentioned that for next Thursday, I just wanted to make sure Dr. Braybrand and staff will have a prepared statement, whether it's kind of a one-page fact sheet, but I would like to see something posted on board docs that we can reference related to middle school security cameras, what our Office of Safety and Security had done as part of its assessment for the merits for having it, and again, what any information that you want to provide about some of the things we've talked about here. But again, when we go to vote on a week from Thursday, the public may not know anything about this conversation to date. They're just going to see us voting on cameras. And for those who worry about the privacy of their students, because public education is compulsory, children don't have a choice to go into a building with cameras. They're required to attend school. And that's been sort of the civil liberties devil's advocate perspective, is that we're putting in cameras in a place that children don't have a choice. So I appreciate that very much. So this section of the work session is now concluded, and I will turn this back over to the chair.
Great. With that, I'm going to, we'll take 5 minutes so that the deck can be changed. And at that point, I apologize, but we're about 45 minutes behind.